Welcome again to Full Disclosure with the Executive. My name is Trevor James. I'm standing in for Pastor Terence Baines tonight again. Tonight, I am pleased to have the privilege to be joined by my friend from Dominica. I'm not sure what part of the world he is in tonight, who is based in Antigua. I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Darwin Telemack. Mr. Telemack is CEO of the Antigua Port Authority. He's chairman of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Port Committee. He's chairman of the Port Management Association of the Caribbean. And he holds the vice chairmanship of the International Committee of Ports of the OAS. Welcome, Mr. Telemack. Mr. Telemack brings a wide breadth of knowledge in port management, port construction, and commercial issues relating to connectivity across the region and probably across the world. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Good evening to you and good evening to the listening public in Trinidad and Tobago. More specifically to Tobago, I would imagine that your focus is on Tobago, but we're happy to share with you on relevant issues this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting the invitation, Darwin. And it's good to see you. How are you? How are you, Darwin? How is the family? How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I was attempting to get the link to send out to my daughter, who would probably be watching, along with my wife, who would be watching. But they're doing well, and my port family all over the Caribbean, I'm wishing them well this evening as well. Particularly my staff in Antigua and Barbuda, and I'm currently attending the industry day at industry conference, at the Caribbean Maritime University in Jamaica. And today is the World Maritime Day, and focusing on our seas and our oceans. And certainly, I think our oceans represent treasures that we have to manage and utilize to the benefit of our people. And indeed, it is an honor to be here in Jamaica representing the Port Management Association of the Caribbean at this very significant industry conference.
All right. So Darwin, this is the first installment, and I'm saying first because I'm hoping that you will join me again sometime later in the month, time permitting. But we are engaged in Tobago in trying to build out the infrastructure necessary to connect Tobago to the region and to the world. We've set the policy direction of developing the Port of Scarborough. The Port of Scarborough has it will be a multi-use port with a cruise ship terminal and hopefully a small cargo terminal as well. Our hope is to birth 4 or 5 mega ships at the same time, and along with the plan is a plan to build out some form of marinas around the island. Maybe we have identified 2 sites, and we are hoping to develop that. So as we are building up later this month to our second round of consultations, Reed Port, and I thought that it would be a good opportunity to speak to someone with your level of experience in port management and see how we can share with the public the benefits of building out such infrastructure in an island like Tobago. So my first question is, when you look from where you sit, is there a benefit, given the construct of the region and Trinidad and Tobago, for Tobago to be considering such major infrastructure development in port facilities?
Well, good evening again to your listeners. I'd like to extend to you, first of all, my gratitude for inviting me to speak to your islanders on this subject, as well as to take the opportunity to share my experience as it relates to port infrastructure in the region, the reason that those infrastructure are necessary, some of the benefits of those infrastructure, how you strategically link them, and the focus not only on having the infrastructure being part of your plan, but ensuring that there is the added benefits of putting these infrastructure in place. First of all, we live in a pretty unique part of the world. It's unique because we have very friendly oceans. The Caribbean Sea is a pretty friendly environment. We have an environment that facilitates a lot of ocean going trade. Panama Canal comes into the Caribbean Sea. We have North American cargo heading south into the Caribbean, into Central South America. And so the Caribbean is in a very unique space. And as such, our oceans provide opportunities for us. We are also in a unique position because, as small islands, we are surrounded by water. The mode of transport in and out of our regions are usually maritime and aviation. We don't have rail, we don't have high-speed highways and tunnels that connect our islands. And so we focus on two main sources of uh, connectivity, aviation and maritime. And as each island looks to position itself to ensure that the livelihoods and the lives of the citizens can be maintained and improved, we look at options to develop both scenarios. Both modalities are challenged by scale. You have small islands, limited population, and as such, you have to be quite mindful of those realities as you venture into any of these developments. However, there is the understanding that with good planning, good strategy, one can expand on these infrastructure, but it needs to be done through very strategic discussions and partnerships with users. I am one who believes that as islands, sometimes we build in a lot of instances they are barely you optimized, and sometimes they're not really used to their optimum benefits, and that's because the strategy usually includes building something and then trying to figure out how to use it. So as on deciding what you are building on, I'm happy to see that you are looking forward to start looking at attracting interested parties to connect with your strategy to build out the intended development that you're looking at. Now, Tobago is in a very good position from an island perspective. The size of the island, the attributes of the island, the location of the island. You're a little bit outside of the hurricane belt, and therefore it's a good position to be in. You don't really get bad weather down there. You've had some bad weather way back when. You're not really one of the islands that are threatened every single June to November, and as such, that plays up for an interesting location. Second, Tobago still has an island feel. It's not a very overly developed island. There are some natural attributes. You have wonderful reefs, beautiful landscapes. You have lovely golf courses. It still has this whole Caribbean island feel, and those are some unique traits that visitors look for. The combination of Trinidad and Tobago, in my perspective, would give Tobago a unique opportunity to build out a good cruise opportunity. But the island itself does not lend to determining that it is going to be a vanguard or a major marquee cruise destination without the partnerships being established. So it is crucial to go out, seek partnerships, discuss the varying development thrust that you are putting forward, and ensure that you have buy-in from the industry as you project to make your development. In the end, you are your location being in the Southern Caribbean does create some challenges because, as it relates to cruising in the Southern Caribbean, it would probably be extended to the lines that go for more than a 3, 4, 5 day cruise. It would be those who go for longer, and there are many of those who do that. Carnival Cruise Lines is designing a service that goes for 14 days from Antigua to Barbados and a few other islands. And so there are opportunities with some of these services. There are those that go down to Aruba, Curacao, and they make the turnaround in that area. There are opportunities there as well. So from my perspective, what would be required, like I said, is to ensure that you have the right partners agreeing, signing up, ready to roll. And there are some very good models that one can explore. For example, I like the Falmouth model in Jamaica as a very good option. I don't see much of that happening in the Caribbean, but Falmouth Harbor in Trelawney in Jamaica is I think, one of the prettiest cruise terminals. The berthing area on either side is maybe a bit challenging in some cases to get in, but once you get off the ships and you walk into that beautiful terminal, it's quite a breathtaking place to see. I think that development represents a partnership between the cruise lines and the Port Authority, where there was firm agreement with the cruise lines that they would actually support the development of a cruise berth in that location in Jamaica. Jamaica already had 2 or 3 cruise ports. So it doesn't mean that you have to be bringing them into a established area. They are interested in looking at new and interesting areas. And sometimes, as you've been going to the same place over and over again, the cruise companies would like to find new areas to create a different feel in our Caribbean for the passengers, because they've gone to the same place over and over again. And certainly, this would be one of the avenues for a new experience for Tobago. Now, what they did in Falmouth is the Port Authority and went to the cruise lines and they made a request for some partnerships. And they discussed it, and the cruise lines agreed to partner with the Port Authority in the following manner. Cruise lines said, okay, we will agree to do a capex. What's the capex? That is, we would allow you as the port to charge us $18 per passenger for the duration of the loan. So for the mortgage period, they would allow for 18, and when the mortgage is paid off, that capex would go away and the rate would come back down to what it was prior. So what does the port want? I particularly like that model because it's very interesting. It's one where they agreed to build the port and the terminal to have a new and exciting location, albeit by moving passengers into that space to pay for the development, with the understanding that going forward, they would have a more reasonable cost. And what that did is 2 things. It allowed the cruise ships to have a new location, new and exciting location, and it eased the burden on the Port Authority from having to come up with a massive debt that it would struggle to maintain. Once the mortgage was paid off and the port didn't have that burdensome mortgage to deal with, the reduction would become more manageable. And if the terminal and the port was interested enough, the throughput that would continue thereafter would be sufficient to keep the port
Maintain it.
happy, Yes, and maintain the whole concept.
L- Let
Go
me
ahead.
see if I understand you, Darwin. You're saying that the, the cruise lines agreed to fund the construction of the port, pay a premium, and then reduce that figure after the loan was paid off. It
Yes,
sounds a
but
bit
it sounds a bit.
it sounds a bit funny to the listener.
Well, think about it this way. Um, what do ships need to allow their passengers to get off? They need a berth.
Hmm.
What do islands struggle with? They struggle with sufficient financing to create the berth. Now, there are many times when, in an effort to try to finance the berth, the port has to raise the fee to operate at the port to such a level that it becomes burdensome on the line. And as it becomes burdensome on the lines have difficulty bringing a lot of people into the port because obviously, if you're going to have to pay a massive premium to bring your people in, you're going to think twice about how many people you run through that port. But one of the things that I've been advocating for is that there needs to be a partnership, a better partnership between the industry and the ports. Ports themselves have to understand that there need to be greater efficiency in how the port is constructed, how the port is operated, and and the overall reason and strategy for the port cannot be that it becomes the center of profit making for the island because cruising has a greater impact to the destination than the port. The port is not the central entity that drives cruising. No one comes to a port, they come to an island. And so the port has to be constructed in a way that does not inhibit the desire and interests of the line, which is what this example did. The ships were so it was so strategic for them that all they had to do was to increase the numbers of people they brought in over a period of time, and they could shorten the mortgage period. And once that mortgage period is ended, they go down to the rate that they have, and they can now come there happily thereafter without the burden on the port and with a much more beneficial interest to them. Now, one might say, well, but the port may have lost. No, because the interest of the destination has to be greater than the interest of the port. It's maybe some might say that as a port manager, I'm speaking in a little, um, a little. It might sound crazy, but it's cruising is not about paying the port to come to your destination. Cruising is about creating a dynamic impact, sorry, where the parking at the port is sufficiently beneficial to the line and the port, but the destination creates the excitement that tourism wants, that the tourist wants, that the ship wants their passengers to feel that they're engaged beyond the port. And I'll give you an example of my philosophy because I think too that as a region we are so focused on the primary engagement at our ports that we forget the principle of why cruising exists. Cruising exists so that your restaurants, your scuba divers, your jet ski operators, your tour operators, all those creative things that you have on your islands, those people can actually show interest to the tourists, get them to spend money. And so it's the spend that you have to actually elevate. Sometimes I think we spend so much time trying to address the earnings on the port side that we forget the real elements that cruising is supposed to drive, which is the creative aspects of our socialization and culture that invigorates the tourists and makes them willing to buy things that we have. And I'll give you even a better example that I like to use, and this is probably the first time I'm going to share this to the public. So the Tobago, and if you're listening from wherever you are, you might be you might think this is odd, but I think of the port as a parking lot. It's really not that pretty. It's a piece of concrete where the ship parks. Now, it has to pay for parking. So we should ensure that the parking is sufficient to cover the cost of the port, the operating of the port through. But let's step back for a minute. When you go to Hilo or you go to one of the big supermarkets or Price Smart or one of the other Massey, there's a massive parking lot and you park for free. Now, there's no cost to parking because the parking is a service that you provide because you're going to bring the person inside your store and you're going to try to empty their pockets. I think we need to start turning the switch because sometimes we calculate the earnings on the port side and then we become lazy on the destination side. Well, if you get $10 a head for a passenger, that's probably a good number. Or even if you said $20 on the port side or $15, whatever the number is, that is a captive number that you must get. And no matter what the number is, there's no more that you get than that. That's not a very creative way to take someone's money from them because it's a captive space. That's all you get. So you go to the mall, and if every mall or every shopping center had a limited amount that they wanted to take from your wallet, they will not be in business. So I want us to start thinking of our destinations, all of them, all the islands, as a shopping mall. And what happens as a shopping mall? You walk in, and if you have a kid with you, there is ice cream, there is a hot dog, there is a smoothie, there are candies. They want you to spend. And they come up with creative ways to spend. I like to use the scenario of Dolphin Mall in Miami. When you pull up to Dolphin Mall, many people have been there. I'm sure you've been there, Trevor. What you see is a big wide parking lot with about 2,000 parking spaces that no one pays a dime for. Dolphin Mall will make you park for the entire day, but when you get inside, there is Aldo's, H&M's, Victoria's Secrets, Levi's, Sunglass Hut. There are so many stores that you're literally walking into Cheesecake Factory on one side, the hot dog stand on the next side, the Häagen-Dazs ice cream in front of you,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they're trying to make you spend.
Yes.
And we get so fixated on our port as a area for earnings that we're forgetting to create that dynamism in our markets. So as you enter that,
So the excursion sites, the restaurants, the forts, those kind of sites are equally or maybe more important to develop simultaneously than the birds themselves.
well, the birth is necessary because you must have the birth, but the birth can't be the basis for winning. The birth is the starting, and you only get enough at the birth to entice people to come in. The excitement is what's your shopping mall, what's your Victoria's Secret, what's your Bloomingdale's, what's your Macy's, what's your Levi. We have to start looking at our islands to ensure that as people come to our shores, that we have a divergence of distinct things that can allow them to spend, because as they spend, that's where you win. So a guy wants a coconut, a guy wants some interesting food that you have on the other side, or some craft, or he wants to go on your glass bottom boat, or he wants to go on your tours, horseback riding, play golf, or some new things, maybe just an exciting festival that you have on every given day. I mean, if you went to malls and all you saw were the same thing every single day, then that mall is going to die. No one is going to want to go to that mall after a while. But if you notice, they switch things around. And so we have to get more creative in our islands, building out more and more interesting components to attract people to spend. So instead of getting $8, $9, $10 at the port that we focus on, yeah, we made some money there. Let's get $200 because there's a nice bottle of rum that you can sell, an interesting dish that you've created, or something that you've made. And that's not easy to do. That means we have to stop being lazy, get more creative, get more interested, get more aggressive in building new ideas, new concepts. And that means going out into different places, learning what the people are wanting and looking for. And sometimes it might be a very simple thing. It might be organizing our towns and our villages in a whole different space, that maybe just the breathtaking, beautiful environment that's clean and friendly and warm entices people to want to spend an extra hour in standing next to the house that is selling lemonade stand lemonades and buying it. Before you know it, you sold a piece of breadfruit or fried something here and there, and people are tasting new things, and then you start noticing that your spend from your visitors have gone from $50 to $90, and that $40 jump way outweighs what you made on the port side. And in some markets, by the way, you can get as high as $200+ $400. If you look at the spend on a per port basis, you would see what it is. And in some ports, it's very low. Some are low as $70, $60. And on those ports that are not getting the $100, $200, $300, $400 per passenger, that means the malls are not as interesting. And so we want to get creative. The other thing that we have to do is we have to also ensure that not every mall has the same thing. So each island wants to have some uniqueness about itself. And your island creates that opportunity by itself, and you have to get creative. So that means, as part of your learning and training within your whole education system, if this is going to be an area that you're going to focus on, then you have to switch to have creative arts as part of your strategy. You have to get your people out to see new markets, different markets, experience different things, bring it home, tweak it a little bit, make it a little different, so that when they come, they say, "Oh, this is happening over here, but it's different here." And that, I think, are some of the things we need to do to create a different experience. If the experience becomes interesting, the sky's the limit for what you can do on your island. And especially if you keep juicing it up and changing it, then the ships will respond, and they're going to keep coming.
All right, so Darwin, very good. You just completed the upgrade to the Antigua port. What are the benefits to an island like Tobago, building out new infrastructure, having the ability to have new technology in the Caribbean region today? What is the benefit for building a multi-use port today, where we are coming in last in the game, essentially? What are the benefits that can be derived to the island because of that fact?
I don't know if you're coming in last. Last is
No. I mean, what I mean is that we are building infrastructure at the back end. Antigua and Barbados and St. Lucia are ahead of us. But apart from Antigua and maybe St. Vincent now, a lot of the infrastructure maybe dated is a better word, infrastructure. And so I'm wondering, what benefits do we have in the marketplace if we're building now?
Well, I think what I just shared with you is that the issue of where you come in or where you are is relative to what your strategy is. I mean, you for example, you could see an island with a port and go build one. Don't have a strategy, you would have a port, but it's going to be underutilized. You're never really going to optimize the benefit of it. So I think that woven within the thought of what you intend to do has to be a very clear and well-structured strategy that includes a planned approach to develop your own uniqueness, creative marketing of your product. Start looking at how you can energize your local space to create that excitement that people will love to come into. And as you differentiate yourself and brand yourself, you're going to start seeing the benefits coming in. Now, there are two ways to answer your question more directly. One of them is in Antigua, we've done two things. We've built out the cruise terminal. We've leased the cruise terminal to Global Ports which is the entity now managing the cruise terminal. Although before we that I think was quite interesting and unique when it was done in the region. There had not been many ports in the region that had seen the wisdom of separating the cargo from the cruise port. Now, that is something that I think islands have to measure very carefully, because if the volumes are not there and if the justification isn't there, then you have to be wary about building out two separate things. But if the justification can be made that the destination can in fact carry it and the interest is there and the partnerships are designed, then I think it's all clear to go ahead and do this. Now, the separation means that cargo ships don't hold up cruise ships don't hold up cargo ships. And for us in Antigua, that unique blend creates a very attractive options for us. So we have a dedicated cruise terminal that can berth 5 full-size cruise ships, including the last berth that we built, which was big enough to host the Oasis class vessel, which is the largest cruise ship in the world. Although there's one that from Carnival that now exceeds that by only a fraction of maybe a meter or two, but it's all the same size. But we can berth those ships in Antigua right now. So we can do 5 ships at the main berth. We can do one at 1 or 2 at English Harbor, and we can do another one, small ones. We only let small ones go over to Barbuda. We can do all of that in one day. Now, that does not in any way impinge on us being able to berth 1, 2, 3 cargo ships at the same time in Antigua. So we build out a maritime environment that creates an opportunity for us to have multiple use and also not create a negative impact or low productivity or inefficiency for cargo, so for passenger cargo or containerized or break bulk cargo as well. So that's what we've done in Antigua. Very, I think, interesting and creative option. Now, Antigua is also a pretty mature market from a cruise and cargo perspective. We've been doing cruise for many, many years. And part of what we are trying to reinvigorate now is the product itself. And Colin James, who is responsible for promotions and marketing, is going out trying to bring in some new aspects to the market to energize it. We're looking at building out a new beach bar with Royal Caribbean and doing various things to try to juice up the product. Because at the end of the day, like I said, if the effort is to drive up the cost of parking, yeah, you will get. But when the parking cost gets too high, it becomes restrictive. Yeah. So we have to make the destination more exciting. So I think, in my mind, for your market in Tobago, you are in a unique position to spend some time looking at all of the product lines that exist in all the market, and which is a unique space for you to be in. And so when you ask about your position, you may have a vantage point to see what are the things that are working, what's exciting, and how can we take pieces of those, components of those, to create a whole new space, because there might be things missing. Yeah. And sometimes in marketing, being number one is probably not the best place to be, because when you're number one, you're focusing so much on maintaining the things you did to keep your position that you can't adjust to do the new things and the emerging things. And so coming from behind, it gives you a very, very interesting perspective to be able to look at what's there, what's missing, and what new things you can add to the mix. So your intent to build out that sort of facility should not just be focused on a port-centric effort. It has to be driven by a broader strategic marketing approach, and that requires a detailed market studies, detailed assessments, designing products, listing them, all the products, looking at the ones that you can do easily, adapt easily, and then looking to see, Trevor, how many islands in the Caribbean can you take a small boat out, go out to the middle of the sea, and end up in a hot water spring with fishes all over the place? I mean, that doesn't happen. Right. So you have something that's very unique, and That in itself is something that you can harness and market and build as one of your marquee options. You and other things that can drive some interest as well. So packaging that and coming up with to the cruise lines with 5, 6, 20 different interesting things can lead to vessels saying, maybe this is something we should look at. Now, part of what you can do is there are some, and I know a few of them. They're the high spenders. They're not the bigger guys. They're the smaller guys. They love to have markets that are not really being driven by mass tourism. You know, they're some of the Med Club, the Club Meds, Silver Seals, a few of the heavy luxury lines where you cruise for 7 days for $60,000-$80,000 per passenger. And you can start off by looking at how can we get some of those. As a matter of fact, those cruise lines may not even require a big berth. You may want to start looking at that now and say, okay, how can we go out and see if those folks would want to just come to an island where they can get a nice space, spend a day or two, and sometimes they do spend 2 days, because some of those vessels come into Antigua, they're looking for areas where you don't have a whole 5,000-6,000 people in. So you might be able to look there and see if those are options for you. So basically, what you need to look at is how do you start harnessing the advantages you have and build out from there over time, but do that in concert with industry. I think too many times we focus on what we see as a need for us to be looking the same as everybody else and not understanding what the industry is saying and how we can attach ourselves to the industry. As a matter of fact, it is industry that should drive infrastructure, not the other way around. And sometimes we get too fixated on wanting to build out the infrastructure without industry knowledge and trends as to where it's going. I can give you a very good example of that, which happened in Antigua in 1968. We built a brand new port. It's the one that we just dismantled to build a new one. But when we built the port in 1968, we did not take into account that containers were around the corner. So we built a break bulk port. Now, what that means is, like it's every island, there's a port with a big warehouse in the middle of it, right next to the dock. And we built that 3 years before the first container showed up. And for 50 years, we were stuck with a break bulk port while containerization dominated industry. And what could have happened is if there were the type of discussions that were being had with the infrastructural plans and designs with the industry that was going to use that infrastructure, you would have had a situation where we never had the type of high risk, low productive environment that existed for so many years, which increased costs, increased risk, created challenges, and we fixed that now. We now have no warehouse anywhere close to our cargo terminal because we're only lifting containers from ships to shore, and those containers are being opened in the hinterland over by customers' warehouses and the place of businesses. So this happened because the two things were not really aligned. And even now, when you start looking at how the industry is emerging, as a region, we're having less and less cargo ships coming through the region. And so what we design as ports itself, that too has to be managed. And I heard you mention that on the cargo side, you were looking at not such a big footprint, which is pretty wise. I think that's a fair assessment that has to be done. You have to build what is important to facilitate your existence on your island, not try to look like someone else, which is a very normal thing for us as islands. You have this, I want that as well. And so I think that too is something that I would be ensuring to advise you that as you build out your plans, that you look at what are we going to need? What is industry saying? Are there going to be these large ships coming around that we would actually be able to berth them regularly and support the type of investment we're going to put in on the cargo side? And if you can get those answers, then you need to step back and say, okay, maybe we built a scale with the capacity to expand because we have the room to do so. But for the time being, we're going to build just what we need and look to see what happens down the road. I think that's a better development strategy and something that I would certainly encourage.
So I hear you, Darwin. let's talk about this transient population that comes through the port, and how does an island feed this population? What is required? We've had this conversation in Tobago for a long time that says, we don't produce enough in order to attract a container ship. Um, does the transient population from the cruise, in fact, benefit the cargo side because of the fact that we are import islands, and there's a need to now feed significantly larger numbers than our local population?
Well, definitely. I think that's true about all the islands. I for that in Antigua's case, we've had over 800,000 cruise passengers in a few years back, 2018, 2019. In addition to that, we've had 200, 300,000 passengers coming by air. So we have over 1 million people coming through Antigua over a 12-month period. Those folks have to eat, they have to sleep, they have to use your resources. A lot of them use your healthcare facilities, your police officers, your roads, your lights, your electricity, sorry, and all of your resources are used up by this transient population. Your strategy has to include those numbers. They don't stay there all day. They don't stay there all night, every night, but they show up. They're on your streets. They are in your restaurants. They're in your supermarkets, and one has to plan for that. I think that is a very critical part to understand how you build out infrastructure. Because if your roads are not prepared for the type of heavy traffic you're going to have doing your tours, moving people from one side of the island to the next, you're going to end up with people not being too happy and not be feeling comfortable as they move. So you have to plan for that. That plan has to be very, like I said, strategic. It has to be something that you don't outpace yourself with, but you do it in concert with the growth pattern that you see. And you don't just, the one thing that I can say in that respect first is that, well, because you have 2 million people coming through Barbados doesn't mean you're going to have 2 million people coming through Tobago. And that I'm just throwing numbers out. I'm not saying that happens. So one has to be sure that you are addressing you. You cannot, islands don't put blinders on, and I'm praying that we all start putting on blinders. Forget about what you see to the left of you and to the right of you. Focus on what your needs are. Do you need what you're about to build? Do you really need it? Do you need to be as big as you're building it? I mean, if you look at what has happened in the region, one has seen a massive explosion of international airports. I
Yes.
mean, it's clear. We've seen so many international airports, and today they are all empty. As a matter of fact, the pressure is so great that we can't even move around the region anymore. There are airports with no flights. There are islands that you can't get to within 2 days. There are islands that you can't get to except you go to Miami to get there. There are islands that you really have to struggle to find a way to get there. And those islands have very large airports. And so building infrastructure out without the corresponding usage or the knowledge of that usage or the commitment for usage is something that I would not encourage, and something that I have gotten in trouble with. As a matter of fact, I'm speaking at in Martinique in a couple of weeks at the ACS conference on regional connectivity, and I'll be addressing some of those issues there. But the whole idea of all of us building out large infrastructure is something that we have to take stock of and ask ourselves whether in fact it would be better to harness our resources and utilize the services that are closest to us. For example, there's Piarco in Trinidad. There don't need to be a Piarco in Tobago. That's something that you can use. As a matter of fact, the services between those two islands is something that can help each other significantly, and one that has actually helped. Now, one may want to speak about building out a lot more capacity in each one of the islands. That might be something you want to look at. But as you do that, it shouldn't be that you want to marry or mirror what the other one has, because it helps each of us if we can use more of a facility in our immediate surroundings than to go ahead and do one ourselves. To just to highlight what we've seen, I'm in Jamaica. The airport in Jamaica has been privatized out to a private company. The government had to find a partner to come and manage that because the debt burden was excessive, and there were so many challenges with it. That was done. The news is that Barbados has just had to do that as well, as these airports have become challenging for various governments. And still, we're seeing two of the more busiest airports being taken over by private companies, and you're still seeing airports being thought of as being necessities. And as we do that, we are not really learning how to rely on each other. We are, in fact, still putting blind. We're not putting the blinders on. We're looking to the right, looking to the left, and saying, "Hey, maybe we should have one too." And as we do that, we are distant the islands that are so close together, making them very far. You can't get there. So an island that was accessible 2, 3, 4 years ago, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, now you can't get there in a day or two, or maybe even three, depending on the actual day of the week. Those are significant issues that we have to address and look to see how we can address them.
But Darwin, is that a consequence of of airport construction, or is it something else? I mean, as you say, getting to Martinique might require going to Miami, or taking a ferry from St. Lucia or something like that. But is the fact that Martinique built a new airport directly related to the inability to get to Martinique?
Well, at the end of the day, what I think has happened in the Caribbean is that the the combination of the industry transformation and the knowledge of the industry itself and the infrastructure that we build have never really met. So you have a mismatch going on.
Mm,
The size of aircraft that connected us was not what we built the airports for,
right.
because the aircrafts that connected us were Dash 8s, Avros, ATRs. You look at the airports we built, clearly we were designing those airports for
Wide body
wide bodied
aircraft.
aircraft. Right. And as these wide bodied aircrafts showed up, it made the use of the smaller aircrafts more difficult. So much so that you ended up with a scenario where you could easily get from London to some of our markets, from Canada to some of our markets, from New York to some of our markets, and from Miami definitely to some of our markets. But you can't get from Trinidad to Grenada. It's kind of like crazy,
Yeah.
you know. And but that's the focus became significantly silo-ish in our strategy, without realizing that we could use some of the bigger airports closer to us to facilitate the connectivity that we need with the smaller aircrafts. Because Trevor, the the concept of regional travel is not as great as we say it is. For example, we had a mass traffic into Guyana the other day, but that's
Hmm.
because of the CPL finals. Or now Guyana is booming. You may see some traffic going in there, but generally speaking, you're not, and even now, you're not going to see a vast number of people from St. Vincent flying to Guyana, or Grenada flying to Guyana, or even Grenadians flying to St. Vincent. We don't see a lot of those sort of moves happening in large numbers very frequently. So regional travel has been at best driven by events, cricket, carnival, music festivals, and stuff like that. But generally, apart from that, traffic has been pretty minimal. What has made it happen is the combination of international traffic at specific hub locations. So Norman Manning would be one. Uh, Grantley Adams would be one. VC Bird would be one, and Piarca would be one. Generally, the hub locations for the region, and you had this traffic coming in there, and Liat and Cal and some other smaller airlines were moving in between. Now, so you would have large planes coming into those markets, and the feeder vessels, smaller aircraft, would be going into the smaller islands until we decided, you know what, I want the traffic coming straight to me now. So we skipped Normal Manley, we skipped Grantley Adam, we skipped Piarco and VC Bird. And we wanted to go straight to St. Kitts, to St. Lucia, to Grenada, to Dominica, to Anguilla, to St. Martin, to everywhere. And all of a sudden, those international passengers that made up the bulk of passengers that would make up enough volumes to keep the regional airlines flying, they were gone. And so what has happened now is you can more easily get a daily flight back to what we have restructured to be our main hub.
Which is Miami.
We've shifted the reliance on regional travel from within ourselves to Miami. So you can definitely get to Miami every day. Well, if the plane isn't too full, there is a flight going there every day. What I can tell you, there's no island right now that has a flight going to every island. You could definitely get a Liat flight to almost every island every day a few years ago. And forget the name Liat. At least you could get a flight. Mm-hmm. Right now, with the removal of so much of the international traffic, it's difficult for the inter-island travel to happen in a very efficient manner, daily or twice a day as it used to. And so even the effort that Inter-Caribbean has attempted to do is becoming very difficult for them to sustain, because Inter-Caribbean is a private airline, and a lot of people have been beating up on them. But we should understand their plight as well. They're now being asked to do markets that were supported by a government run Liat service. And as that government subsidized Liat service is no longer in place, the private airline is finding it difficult to do all the markets that Liat was doing. It's just not possible. And as a matter of fact, I'm saying it here on your TV show, I'll probably get in trouble. I'm saying, whereas we would subsidize, some of the markets would subsidize some of the empty seats on Virgin and British Airways and American, where's the discussion with Inter-Caribbean to subsidize those empty seats? I mean, it's like, well, what about us? What about our Caribbean people? What about the interests of our people and the common good that we must ensure that we maintain as a region to our people? I
don't want to go down this line, but as you were there, isn't it a thought for governments to reduce the tax on these tickets and therefore reduce the cost and therefore bring more people? In my head, we are paying, I'm going to Barbados, it's cost me $3,000, but half of that is taxes. And the same parking lot idea that you discussed with the ship, isn't it more economical for whichever country, I say Barbados, but whichever country, to say, listen, if I bring 10 more Tobagonians or 10 more Trinidadians or 10 more Grenadians to my country, they're going to spend more money instead of giving me, as a government, the taxes on a ticket.
Well, the truth is, if you've built an airport for large amounts of money and the debt exists, you have to figure out how to pay for it. And so this is why I'm saying that before you build out that burdensome liability, let us assess what the capacity to repay is and how much pressure that's going to create across the board. So there's a certain wisdom in part of what you just said, and then there's the other part that we have to take a deep look at. I am saying that if we would have looked at the broader regional interest and not our silo approach to saying, I want my hotels to be full, so my direct flights from Miami, London, Canada into my country helps with that, and so we will deal with the other thing later. Well, we will have flights coming to our hotels, but then the worker who is in St. Lucia trying to get to St. Kitts is gonna have a hard time getting home if the wife is sick or the child is not well or they have to go to a meeting. They're like, wow, I can't. I don't have a visa to fly to Miami, and so
Is there now, Darwin, a need to connect the islands more by sea than by air?
whichever way you connect the islands, what the thought that has to go into discussion right now is regional transport being viewed as a strict commercial entity, or should we begin to see commercial transport as a public good and address it from that perspective? You spoke about taxes and reducing the taxes, but I think we probably ought to look at it in a different way. When you think of public transport in all of our islands, most of it is heavily subsidized. So is it not something that we have to start looking at? But the subsidy cannot be eaten up in high taxes as well. So one has to address all of those things. And I believe when it is looked at in its broad sense, we may have to go back to the drawing board and start figuring out what makes more sense. Trevor, there is no region in the world. An example, the Indonesian islands, hundreds of islands. It is said that there may be thousands of islands in Indonesia. But the thing about Indonesia, which makes it work, is it is one country. So the government has to provide that sort of support to all. Went there, you would see small docks in online islands, no big ports, small runways because they're going to support them with smaller aircrafts, because there is a strategy that says, I know I'm going to bring in my bulk of my passengers into Jakarta, Java, and Bali, and then feed the other islands from these main islands. And there's some other big islands as well. So that the whole idea of hubs building regions is something that we need to get back to. We can't all have everything that we need. We have to rely on each other. As a matter of fact, the whole concept of the integration movement was driven by a need of reliance on each other, not self-reliance as we've emerged into, but an interdependency that allows for certain support mechanisms to be in place so we all could exist. And we are moving, I think, away from that concept, because if we can fill our hotels has become more important than the ability to integrate our people. So we get full flights from North America, Canada, and Europe, and we speak of very good tourism numbers, but you can't get to an island next to you. The Grenadian people are crying out. They have a runway longer than most of the islands, and they can't get flights. They can get a flight to Miami, but they can't get to St. Lucia next to them, or Antigua, or anywhere around them. And so as you do that, we are beginning to see a disintegration of the integration movement in ways that must concern us. We have to ensure that the connection among our people is something that we foster. And so I am not one who would have been voicing so much for government's involvement in many things, but I think in this instance, we need to get back to the drawing board and sit and get the powers that be to see that if we don't redesign some level of hub and spoke, we're going to continue to see the region as islands that are very close but distance very far, because we just can't get to each other. And that can't be something that we're going to allow to happen, because the region itself requires that we integrate. And what we're seeing is a level of disintegration that is not good for us. I mean, culturally, economically, socially, we need each other. We rely on each other. There are families that live in multiple islands, different places, that needs to get up and go and move around. all of that is coming to a halt. You can't get to places, and if you get there, you're stuck there for too long, and you're going to a meeting that would take you an hour or two before, and now it's 2 days, and companies are spending significant more money is having to house their people as they go around because it just takes that much longer to do something that could have been done very simply. And we're not talking about going to Europe. Matter of fact, you can get to Europe easier and quicker than you
Yeah.
can some of the markets right within us.
Yeah. So Darwin, we have 15 minutes. We started late, so I gave up the breaks. Um, so just to summarize, let's just get back to the idea of the multi-use port around the region and the benefit that has for the islands. So that in St. Lucia we have the commercial port and the cruise port adjacent. Similarly in Antigua, in Grenada, in St. George's. What really is the benefit to a multi-use port, given, of course, assuming that you have the space to do it?
Well, there's less of a cruise port in St. Lucia. Grenada has developed one, but if you look at the Grenada example, it's actually an interesting example because Grenada has not built out too much of a big footprint in terms of its cruise port, nor has it developed too much of a large footprint of its cargo port. So I think that might be one of the better examples of a market that has designed something more specific to its need. In addition to that, Grenada has built out some very interesting marinas, and so you look at the strategy in Grenada, and I think that is an island that could be looked at from a maritime perspective as having something that stayed within its means. It's not the still small little thing there, and sometimes they might be thinking maybe we should make it bigger, but if it ain't broken, don't fix it. If it's working for you, let it keep doing that, because debt is not something that you should just absorb, and because someone else did it, doesn't mean that you have to. So they should pay close attention as to how they advance. Now, sometimes you speak, and then folks might say, well, you're speaking because you built a port in Antigua, you don't want anyone else to build one. Well, maybe that's why I'm speaking. Maybe I'm seeing the pressure that it creates to have these new multi-million-dollar facilities and sitting down trying to figure out how do you pay for that without ratcheting up massive port costs on your citizens, and how do you ensure that it pays for it in ways that are not as damaging as it appears that it could be. We're being creative with how we do that, and I think we will succeed in doing some very creative things, not put too much pressure on the public. Now, in that respect, we still would like to say that when you look at the separation between the cruise and cargo and the benefits of it, there's no way you can doubt it. Because if for 6 months your cruise ships are docked at your cargo berth and they're keeping your cargo vessels out, they are creating high costs for the cargo operators, and those cargo operators are passing those costs on to the citizens of those markets in higher freight rates, because they have to compensate for sitting outside for 8 hours, coming in at nights working overtime. The port's not giving them the benefit, and that.
No.
That
What I meant, Darwin, was not multi-use berths, but adjacent berths separated, of course, for cargo and for cruise.
Yes, but that's what I'm explaining.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, if you don't have that separation, all right, what you have is the utilization of one berth, and I'm explaining to you the detriment of that is
Right.
the cargo ships for 6 months have to wait, and that can be very difficult. Very, very. As a matter of fact, it's now going to be very, very challenging for the region if we do not address this issue in a very creative way. The IMO in 2024 it has put out the mandate that they're going to measure the carbon intensity index, or the CII index, on ships. And that means they're going to measure the extent to which ships are burning fossil fuels and give them a rating. Now, the way they're going to measure that is based on how many times you stop at a port, run your engines, all right, and whether you go on for longer distances before you get to the next port. That doesn't happen in the Caribbean. Every island is a couple hours away, so you're going to have ships stopping. And as they stop, if we don't have the capacity to turn the engines off and plug them on to shore power, they're going to be burning fossil fuels. And so it is perceived that we could have a very low CII score for many vessels in the region. Now, that is exacerbated when you have cruise ships that will be at cargo ports with the cargo ships waiting, burning fuel, waiting, coming alongside, burning fuel, waiting. So that in itself is going to create some further issues for transport in our region, something we have to pay attention to. Now, as a matter of priority, we need to be harnessing our minds around how do we address this issue. Not too much urgency has been placed in it just yet, although I've been trying to raise it across the region, but it's something that we really have to pay a heavy focus on. Let me give you an example, Trevor, and your listeners might even wonder why that is. But you can have a ship that is burning fossil fuel from Shanghai, China, all the way to a port in Los Angeles, thousands of miles, and that ship would get an A rating or a B rating because it didn't make a stop on this journey to LA. Now, that's kind of crazy because you're talking about thousands of miles. Well, that's another ship that goes from Trinidad to Tobago to St. Vincent and Grenada will have a worse score, although they only traveled 400 miles, because they're stopping. Every stop, and once again, that's considered short sea shipping. Every stop on a short sea shipping route will create a damaging CII score. How do we fix that? We have to start looking at ways to, one, ensure that berthing at our ports become accessible, so ships are not steaming at sea waiting for cruise ships to move. And ships saying, well, if these markets are going to hold up my vessel and I can't work there, what do I do? I think going back again, we're going to find that hubs are going to become more and more necessary. And where we hub and why we hub has to become less a political discussion, one that's embedded in reality, one that has the interest, the broader interests of the region at its focus, and one that does not simply say, well, if you want to be it, I want to be it too, as we always do, and end up causing us significant harm. In the Pacific Islands, they are designing their hub locations. They're fixing a path towards resolving the CII issue. Part of that fix is you're having ports trying to see which ports can provide shore power. So if you're going along a particular route, maybe 3 or 4 ports can have shore power available. Some ports will have cleaner fuels like LNG available, or other fuels as they come up. All of these things are what we have to start looking. But we live in a region where it is so competitive, and for no good reason, because it just appears that if one island says, I'm going to do this, the next island doesn't say, okay, how can I benefit from that? But I want to do it too, because interdependencies are not things that we do well. But the global dynamics of the industry we are part of is going to force us to take stock of the decisions we make and to realize that regions cannot exist without hubs. Hubs build regions. Singapore is a small island the size of Dominica in Asia that has built a hub in the midst of China, Malaysia, Thailand, all those massive Philippines, all those massive countries are there. But look at all these big countries depending on that small island to hub their cargo and get it efficiently to them. Rotterdam in Europe plays the same role. Panama plays another role. All of South America, Central America, you don't see them trying to fight the Panama Canal. They use it to their benefit. We come in our region and we have little juggling going on every now and then to say, well, if you want this, I want this too. And then we can't seem to get it right. It's time for us to start breaking down the walls that points to ourselves, look at us more as a broader region, and start figuring out where we're going to do what, how it's going to work, and how we're going to feed into the islands that we can support.
Let me ask my final question, which is probably the most controversial question, Darwin. Um, what is your assessment of the port of Port of Spain?
That's not controversial. I think it's a very it's to me that's one of the most important questions that anyone can ask. I think the Port of Spain has the greatest potential to transform the Caribbean than any port in the Caribbean. It has not been optimized to its true potential, and I think it's one of the areas that we have to begin to look at. I think there are challenges with the port. It needs to be upgraded. Yes, it needs to be transformed into a different facility. There are massive problems there. The union challenges are huge. That requires some political effort and some realizations that we must transform ourselves. The issue of the age of the port and the type of operations that exist, all of those needs to be addressed. But the Port of Spain, if properly structured, has to be considered one of the locations where the Caribbean benefits from. I have said for the last 10 years that getting Port of Spain right is going to solve one of the massive connectivity issues we have by maritime in the region. As a matter of fact, some time ago we were talking about 25 by 25, and Port of Spain was not even being focused. We were talking about Guyana, Barbados, and different islands. You can't have a discussion and be serious about integrating transport in the region without a Port of Spain. As a matter of fact, Trinidad and Tobago, with Port of Spain and the port, Point Lisa's port, that, and I consider that to be one and the same, really, when I speak of the issue in Trinidad there. Those are critical connecting points to Caribbean maritime services. And as a matter of fact, the country of Trinidad and Tobago, with some of the resources, manufacturing, labor cost, energy cost, those are factors that beg for a broader engagement on a regional perspective. I am one of the people who believes that with some effort, with some focus, redesigning the Port of Spain is the future of shipping and transport in the Caribbean. There's been some efforts to get some PPP operation going there. I think if one space that I'd like to see a grouping of regional partners come in to foster a whole new dimension in regional transport, it is that port. We can take that port, we can transform the region with it. But one of the things that has to happen is that these hub locations cannot be seen as internalizing their focus and being damaged by the local interest. It has to be broader, so that from the government and the union's perspective, it has to see itself as bigger than itself, a regional space that can be used to facilitate transport and traffic into the region and back. There is great potential there, something that I believe we will be hearing a lot more of, and I'll be speaking and writing more of. But I think that Port of Spain port, it can, or shipping out of Trinidad, can be significantly transformed to the benefit of the region. If you look at what I think should happen, we have, and there are three ports I believe that are critical to this. One of them is the port in Kingston. It is the only, where I'm sitting now, is the only true global port in CARICOM, the only one. As a matter of fact, even when the 25 by 25 was being discussed, Kingston was not even included in the discussion, which I thought was absolutely nuts. So the whole idea of not using Kingston is because we're not looking at a holistic idea.
We have 30 seconds, David.
And I think too that even the Jamaicans needs to wake up to see how Kingston can filter its cargo, global cargo, to Port of Spain, and take the Port of Spain cargo to Guyana, Suriname, up the islands to create a triangle that helps build greater connectivity and better transport service in our region. I think Port of Spain is the key to improving maritime transport in our region.
Will it be done, Darwin? We wait to see. Darwin, it's been a pleasure having you. I'm hoping that we'll come back again and focus more directly on our efforts in Tobago. Maybe later in the month. Who knows? Maybe I'll be blessed to be in Martinique as well. But as usual, speaking to you is always insightful and inspiring. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
we've been talking to Mr. Darwin Telemaque, head of the Antigua Port Authority, and chairman of the Antigua Port Authority, and chairman of PMAC as well. Thank you, and that's the end of full disclosure for tonight. My apologies, I'm tired. See you next week.